Thank you for joining us for this session. My name is Jacqueline, and I'm delighted to be the moderator for this next panel session on securing the Blue Commons, cooperation for an Indo-Pacific maritime order. So the theme of this discussion is obviously very much in line with the broader conference theme of securing seas and strengthening cooperation. I'll invite my panelists shortly, but before that, I'd like to set a very brief context. You are all aware that the Indo-Pacific is now the world's most significant maritime space. The waters here are absolutely essential for global trade, energy flows, and strategic connectivity. However, they are also contested spaces, and this is because they're shaped by the ongoing and intensifying US-China rivalry, hybrid maritime threats, and growing uncertainty about the role of major powers. So against this backdrop, countries in the region are asking critical questions, which include one, how can we secure an inclusive rules-based order for the region? Two, how can partnerships go beyond rhetoric to practical cooperation? And three, how do we ensure regional agency in shaping the future? So to break down this topic, I'm joined by this distinguished panel that will help us distill these questions, basically looking at the strategies, frameworks, and practical steps for an Indo-Pacific maritime architecture that reflects the regional priorities, obviously in full cognizance of the great power competition. So in terms of how we'll proceed, we'll have 2 rounds of questions for each of the speakers, and then if time allows, we'll come back to around the 3rd round, but I'll also invite you later to ask your questions so you can note them down as we go along. So I'd like to introduce my panel, and the first we have Nilanthi Samaranayake, who's an adjunct fellow, East-West Center, United States of America. Then we have Paco Milhiet, visiting fellow S. Rajaratnam, School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Then we have Ipeita Nishida, senior fellow, Japan, US and Security Studies Unit at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. And last but not least, we have Sayantan Halder, who is an associate fellow at the ORF. So you're welcome. So we'll go right into the discussion, and I'd like to begin with you, Nilanthi. My first question to you is, how realistic is a multipolar rules-based maritime order in the Indo-Pacific region, from your perspective? So given the strategic contest that we see between the US and China, and how much might that order look like by 2030? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jacqueline, and my thanks to ORF and CSIS for the invitation to be here. I'll speak to my personal research and views. It's a really interesting question, and I think we can approach it in 2 ways. So first, on one hand, we can look at these trends that point to a strategic direction of increased bipolarity, given the contest between the US and China. And to support that conclusion, we can look to a quantitative analysis of military capabilities alone. So I think you can come away with that conclusion. However, I think when we're talking about what's realistic, what is very much real is that it already is a multipolar world in terms of day-to-day interactions, diplomatic actions, and regional cooperation. And I think there are a few examples we can look to. So ASEAN, that stands out to me personally. Coming from Washington, the fact that ASEAN as an institution can get that phrase, ASEAN centrality, inserted into multiple US officials' speeches, statements, even US national strategy documents. That's really a striking development for a regional institution. I mean, just think about, SARC SARC would not be able to get that kind of influence, for example, in Washington. And then BIMSTEC. This is a maritime-oriented regional cooperative institution, and India has put a lot of effort into BIMSTEC in the past decade or so to really build it up as a regional organization focused on cooperation, particularly in the maritime realm. And especially when you contrast it to SARC, BIMSTEC is really going on an upward trajectory in terms of its growth, and SARC is really in a declining trajectory. And then the Quad, since that's been resurrected about eight or so years ago, we've seen that as a force that points to not only the U.S. role in the Indo-Pacific, but also its most important partners. And then also, I'll add to the mix IONS, the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, and IORA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association. These are both maritime-oriented bodies. They are growing in terms of membership and dialogue partners that are interested in working with it and as a part of it. Also, for smaller states, these institutions have given smaller states the opportunity to really lead these organizations, so leadership opportunities. And I'll call attention to the fact that India will actually take the chair of both IONS and IORA at the end of this year. So I think this sets up a potentially exciting opportunity for India, because there has been this talk for many years about IONS and IORA eventually joining hands. So there's potentially an interesting development there under India's leadership of both organizations beginning at the end of the year. And so for your question about 2030, what could this look like? Predicting the future is it's never a winning game, but I think there are three ways we can approach it. We can think about sort of a steady state in terms of what exists now, the status quo, perhaps a little bit of incrementalism 5 years from now. Another way we can think about it is in terms of little change, so perhaps drawing out some of the implications of current signals coming from the Trump administration, perhaps a decrease in U.S. military forces in the Middle East, perhaps a reduction of troops in Korea. And then we can think of a third option, essentially a big change option. So perhaps that is a war over Taiwan and what that could look like. How protracted would that conflict take? And then just the seismic shift that would occur in terms of threat perceptions by Indo-Pacific countries. So it's very hard to tell at this point what that future could look like, but I think these three courses of action or three futures are a way we can help organize our thinking to situate where we could be heading.
Thank you, Nilanthi, for setting that context very eloquently. I'd like us to turn to the question of regional coalitions and architecture, and I'll come to you, Paco. And so my first question to you is the Quad enough, or should the Indo-Pacific embrace more flexible, issue-based multilateral groupings? And in addition, what role could Indonesia play in this architecture?
Thanking ORF and CSIS for the invitation and the opportunity of the presentation. We had a great talk today and of course yesterday at the RSIS ORF workshop. So maybe I'll start with the second question. What role can Indonesia play? I think one key component is building on existing bilateral good relations to foster and enhance regional and wider collaboration. And I'd like to take one example, which is Indonesia and my country, France, how their bilateral relation we can build on their good bilateral relation to enhance more regional cooperation and multilateral cooperation. So it's been a very intense year for the France and Indonesia relation. Throughout the last 6 months, we had a French aircraft carrier making a port call in Lombok. That was the first time a French aircraft carrier came to Indonesia. In May, we had President Macron, who came to Jakarta and Borobudur. And last month, we had President Prabowo, who was invited as Bastille as the guest of honor. So it's a very intense and dynamic relation. We used to say that in the Indo-Pacific, India was France's best friend, but now I think they're kind of competing with Indonesia. So throughout these visits, multiple documents have been signed and engagements. If you want to take a look at it, the Franco-Indonesian roadmap, it's called 2050 Horizon. And really the collaboration aims to tackle cross-sectoral domains, cybersecurity, maritime cooperation, connectivity, climate change, cultural, even sports. So it's a very wide and intense bilateral relation. And so how this bilateral relation can lead to wider regional cooperation? Well, when you look at it, France and Indonesia share multiple characteristics. Both countries are leaders within their regional organization. So Indonesia in ASEAN, France in the European Union. So that's probably debatable, but theoretically that's the case. Both countries have compatible visions of international relations, strategic autonomy. Indonesia had a bebas actif. France has a gaulo-mitterrandisme, we call it, which basically means we don't want to be aligned on anyone and we don't want to be bullied. France and Indonesia have also a very compatible vision of the Indo-Pacific region. I know Indonesia was a key player in implementing ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and France has developed its own Indo-Pacific strategy since 2018, where ASEAN centrality is a key component of this strategy. So I think really the Indonesia-France bilateral relation can lead to wider regional cooperation and even maybe beyond regional cooperation. Yesterday, a colleague was mentioning trilateral possibilities between India, Indonesia, and France. That's very possible. We used to have trilateral cooperation with India and Australia, also India and Japan, notably regarding Sri Lanka. So yeah, I think there's a lot of possibilities, but we need to build on the existing good bilateral relation. I'll stop for now. And
Great. Yes, thank you. Thanks, Paco. Just moving from that framework to practical action, I'd like to bring in the Japan voice. And my question to you, Peter, is what models of practical burden sharing do you think could deliver quick wins for regional security?
Okay, right. Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for this, and thank you very much to ORF and CSIS for having me here too. So I talk about this burden sharing from the Japanese point of view, but before doing that, in the earlier session, colleague from Sri Lanka mentioned today was a day the atom bomb was dropped for the first time in the history. And this is a day that we Japanese all reflect what we have done in the past. Today might be the day that many of you, the people from this region, may celebrate. But for us, losing the war last time was really big, that we really committed to be peaceful, non-violent actor in this region. That made us actually to become non-responsible actor for a long time as an economic animal and being criticized, not taking the responsibility until after the end of the Cold War. We slowly started to take up the responsibility and then started to see that there are roles that we can play. So Japan was initially really happy to take the burden on the maritime, security, because 99% of all the export imports coming through the sea lane communication. We lost the sea lane communication of the war. That was like a really critical issue. We are still reliant on Middle East fossil fuels. So over the years, when the economy is really strong in the good old days, Japan invested so much on the regions, the port facilities, the information fusion center. Recap was actually the creation of Japan's investments. And also Japan has been participating in the anti-piracy operation in Djibouti for a long time. So on ODA, through ODA, we have provided more than 100 Coast Guard vessels and boats to the region and facilitated people-to-people interaction and the training. Now, having said that, time moved on, and we started to see this responsibility in a different way. That what we thought was more of Japan's own defense. We realized that we also need to take a more proactive role to provide the public goods in this region. So we exchanged, we upgraded our security cooperation with the United States so that Japan and US can be together the cornerstone of peace and security in the region. In this regard, Japan has been engaging at least last 15 years on many of the country's military forces defense institutions on the capacity buildings and transfer of the equipment and also joint exercises so that to build the military to military confidence and for us to make more deterrent capability against China's aggression, but for for the region to become more resilient to any kind of external shock, whether it's a challenge from the external, the rival, or the natural hazards. In this way, it was quite interesting to see the Defense Minister Nakatani on the last Shangri-La dialogue started talking about this new concept, defense concept, cooperation concept called OCEAN, one cooperative effort among nations. Now, the ethos of this is that all those countries in this region who share the same values and interests to maintain the current peace and security and rule of law should come together in hand in hand to cooperate on whatever we can do. Now, it sounds good from the surface, but before what he talked about this ocean, people know that we actually talked about one theater concept, operational concept, which is connecting all those theaters from northeast to South China Seas as one theater. And we need to have the collective defense effort with the US, Japan, Australia, Korea, and the Philippines. Now, so we had the two phases here, right? On one side, we extend arms to show the support, to make the collective, the common goods. On the other hand, we also need to have the collective, the denial capability with the interested partners. So I support.
Great, and thank you for that. I'd like to bring in the India and Indonesian dimension, both of whom are major anchors in this region. And I'll come to you, Sayantan, and my question here is, how can India and Indonesia leverage their bilateral ties to anchor a regionally grounded maritime security framework that aligns with the goals of Indo-Pacific stability? Yeah.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and it's good to be here. Good afternoon to everyone. Well, I think the relationship between India and Indonesia, especially if you look at it from an Indo-Pacific context, is very interesting because there are very many similarities that characterize the two countries. For starters, I think India is a peninsular country whose geography juts out into the Indian Ocean. Indonesia has an archipelagic geography, which has a very important Indian Ocean interface. India and Indonesia both continue to be leading voices in the global south. And in many ways, if you look at India's maritime outlook or changing maritime posture, you will see that apart from this aspect of maritime identity and maritime embeddedness in the Indian Ocean or the broader Indo-Pacific, the global south as a conceptual category has also emerged as a very important pillar of the way in which India seeks to foster cooperation in the Indian Ocean and indeed in the Indo-Pacific. So if we go back to 2015, I think that was a watershed moment in terms of India's foreign policy and how it looked at the oceans, where Prime Minister Modi during his visit to Mauritius spoke about the security and growth for all in the region, the Sagar framework, which in many ways was the guiding framework for India's maritime outlook, which in 2025, recently in March, again during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Mauritius, was advanced to Mahasagar, which is mutual and holistic advancement of security and growth for all in the region. And the primary change that took place, or the primary shift that took place between Sagar and Mahasagar, was the addition of this global south component. So I think in that sense, India and Indonesia are poised to foster deeper partnership in the Indo-Pacific context. Now, if you look at maritime security cooperation, I think it's important, especially in an India-Indonesia context, to reimagine the context itself, to reimagine the concept itself. What do we mean by maritime security? Maritime security must not remain limited to just naval security or coast guard cooperation. I think it is a very dynamic concept now, because multiple other elements are influencing the way in which we are looking at maritime security. So for example, I think what we have to do is not just look at expanding horizons of maritime security, but also, a vertical expansion of maritime security. So it's not just about, Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean coming together in terms of a horizontal expansion, but also vertical elements such as space cooperation has increasingly emerged as a core pillar of how we reimagine maritime security cooperation. Because satellite imagery, maritime domain awareness, I think these are very important aspects of maritime security cooperation framework. Similarly, underwater domain awareness again is emerging as a core pillar in that sense. So I think, these new elements need to figure not just in India-Indonesia cooperation in a maritime sort of a framework, but also I think India and Indonesia as common partners in that sense, with many common and shared interests in the Indo-Pacific, need to sort of take forward such a multifaceted and complex agenda. I think in terms of their cooperation, India and Indonesia are part of IORA, as Nilanthi has mentioned, which is a very important forum in the Indian Ocean region, also because of the idea that IORA represents the Indian Ocean identity, which is very important for us in India, because our primary maritime security interests lie in the Indian Ocean. And therefore, I think, those are countries which are in the Indian Ocean region, we share mutual maritime security challenges, concerns, as well as interests. So in that sense, frameworks like IORA, frameworks like IONS are very important. And apart from that, I think another very important aspect that India and Indonesia both need to pursue together is, as also mentioned by Paco, is the prospect of trilateral relationships. Which are the third countries which share similar concerns with us, and can we work together to foster some kind of a cooperation based on, practical issue areas which will, going forward, become very important areas of cooperation for India and Indonesia.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for those insights. I'd like to come to the second round and prod a little further on the question of the tensions between the US, particularly coming back to you, Nilanthi. I know you've already alluded to it in your first response, but I'd like to hear more specifically, how do you see the US unpredictability shaping the dynamics of maritime security in the region? And most importantly, what agency do Indo-Pacific middle powers have in defining their own regional maritime priorities?
It's a really great question about this topic of U.S. unpredictability. I think it's only been about 7 months of the new U.S. administration in Washington, and there's already been so much change and narratives, and it really, as a reminder to us as analysts, it really reinforces the significant impact that a particular leader can have, especially when we think about the structure of international relations and what the structural forces are that undergird the international system. However, I think there are some continuities, though, that we need to take into account that really predate President Trump entering office in January, when we're thinking about the U.S. approach really across administrations. And I would point to 2 examples of that. We can go back more than a decade to President Obama and his administration. And there was an emphasis on burden sharing. This is a phrase we hear a lot under this Trump administration, but under President Obama, a different political party even, there was a call to have NATO contribute more to burden sharing. I remember doing a study on U.S.-India burden sharing in the Indian Ocean. So, this was a concept that has been really a long time coming. Even though the manner in which it's delivered now, it's very different under this administration. But the overall thinking and strategy behind it has been has certainly predated this administration. Another example is just under President Trump's second administration, within the last 7 months or so, where we've actually seen some examples where the administration got involved in foreign conflicts when it really initially did not want to get involved. And certainly the political base of the administration did not want it to get involved. We can look to the US strikes on the Houthis in Yemen that it participated in with the UK. Also the strikes on Iran, the nuclear facilities, very controversial, especially among the base. And then also even the India-Pakistan conflict recently, where you had senior US officials talking about how it's none of our business, but at the last minute got involved in some of the diplomatic action and conversations. Even though there's a controversy about the efficacy of some of those actions, but even setting that aside, there are 3 examples within the last 7 months where we can actually see where the US felt compelled to use force and compelled to engage in diplomacy that it really had no interest in doing. So I think this speaks to really a vision of the US, how it sees itself in international affairs. So there are some continuities that I think we just need to acknowledge, despite a lot of the headlines and the news of the last 7 months. Then to your question about agency, we have seen this very clear signal about this need for this desire for U.S. allies and partners to contribute more to burden sharing. So because of that, I think by definition, this opens up space for middle powers to contribute more. And I think it really comes down to 2 things. Essentially, what do they want to do? What are they willing to do? And what are they comfortable doing? So I think this point about what the comfort level is for partners, what do they want to do in the Indo-Pacific, is an important criterion. And then I think the second is, what are they capable of doing? Actual capabilities to contribute to maritime security in the region. So certainly, I think, yes, this is really the time for middle powers to write their to-do lists in the Indo-Pacific.
Great. Paco, because we are thinking broadly about cooperation for an Indo-Pacific maritime order, my next question to you is, what lessons from Southeast Asia's maritime cooperation do you think could inform broader Indo-Pacific architecture?
I might sound like the very frustrated European citizen, and like the European Union and the US just had a deal recently. To say that it was bad for the European Union, I think, is an understatement. So I would say that today, any regional organization or any architecture institution where the US is leading, I believe, is not enough. So that recalls to your first question about the Quad. Is the Quad enough? Obviously not. I don't think it's enough because it's oriented towards one particular country, and also it's, whether we want it or not, dominated by the United States of America, which today is not acting as a reliable partner, and even to some extent as a kind of bully. So I think we need to do more, and we need to organize ourselves in wider architecture or organization. And there's already a lot that's being done. My colleagues have been mentioning the IORA and the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium in the Indian Ocean. In the Pacific Ocean, France is actively working with Australia and New Zealand, for example, with the France, Australia, New Zealand mechanism regarding HADR. There is also another Quad called the Quad Pacific, involving the US, France, Australia, New Zealand again, for maritime surveillance and for monitoring illegal fishing. So there's a lot you can do, and it also depends on the geography, on the geographical region you want to focus on. So a lot can be done. What can we learn, I think, from Southeast Asia? That's a great question, and it's a question that's not raised enough. I think the whole ASEAN mentality is something we Europeans need to learn a lot about, notably consensus, consultants, maybe a bit less, being less arrogant. I think we European we used to impose to other countries our vision of the world. And I think we need to learn a lot from what's being done here by ASEAN and by Southeast Asian country, because in the last 10 or 20 years, I think ASEAN has done maybe more than the EU. So there's a lot we can learn from ASEAN. There's a lot we can learn from other countries in Asia. I'm thinking obviously about Japan, South Korea, been doing a lot for the region. But yeah, I think today we need to rethink the global regional architecture and maybe not rely as much as we did before on the US, even if the US will remain a major partner. We need to think beyond the US.
Thank you. Thanks, Paco. I'd like to probe a little further, Ipeta, on your earlier submissions and, of course, building on what Nilante had spoken about. And my question to you is, how is Japan recalibrating its Indo-Pacific strategy amid the evolving US-China dynamics? And what opportunities exist for maritime cooperation?
Thank you very much. The situation in East Asia, especially Japan, is quite different. We don't have a concept. We don't have any freedom for the strategic autonomy to start with. We're embedded into the US system, the allied system that we have. Therefore, it's similar to Australia. So we need to factor in, bring the US in. That was the reason, the beauty of the Quad. And probably AUKUS was the same expectation. Now it's a little bit different. Now, so what I said about this one theater concept is like the central theme is like in defense of the archipelago, including Taiwan. That is the most important piece, right? And to do that, we need to have US in. US is now said to be asking, to pre-commit, but then it really depends on the US commitment, how we react to the challenges. Now, having said that, Japan's engagement in South Asia, Southeast Asia is really different. We know the sensitivity of the region. We know that the countries do not want to take a side between China or the US. So we've been acting as the third party, the party who can who do not demand the political choices, but offer some options to cooperate together. And we have been doing this with ASEAN, Japan-ASEAN Vientiane Vision. That is a sort of the Security Cooperation Initiative we started in 2016. That was very beginning of that kind of conceptual idea. We are also engaging, on a bilateral basis. As you said, bilateral is very important to start with, to fortify the individual relationship, and also to have access to the region. We need to be seen. We need to send messages to our partners and the potential opponent. So, having said that, what we have succeeded, according to the news feed yesterday, is that Australia has finally decided to purchase Japanese frigate, Mogami class, right? This is going to be great news for us because it has been our long time goal to send, to export this complete, defense equipment. And beyond that, there was a news feed a few weeks ago that Japan is going to early retire 6 destroyers and to be remodeled, but with to be shipped to the Philippines. And that is going to be another big major change if this can happen. So I'm very much looking forward how this will unfold because, we really need to have our defense industry to be regain its strength and also to have more interoperability with the region. Finally, we would need to have more regional presences. For that, we need India. We really welcome India's coming in. India-Japan Defense Cooperation Agreement. This actually is, stepped up level of the cooperation, not just with the Indian Ocean, but in this region. And most significantly, it has an element of jointly safeguarding the sea land communication, which Japan definitely needed. And for this, I think this bilateral relation is going to be really important step forward.
Thanks, Peter. Finally, back to you, Sayantan. India advocates for an inclusive vision for the Indo-Pacific region. Now, my question is, how can this vision be translated into a practical security cooperation framework, actualizing it?
Yeah, I think I'll just quickly talk about three areas which I think are going to be very important going forward when we look at maritime security cooperation. I think the idea is that maritime security should reach the last mile. Ultimately, all of it is about the people, right? So I think first would be maritime domain awareness. With the onset of new technologies, I think the imperative to bolster cooperation in the domain of maritime domain awareness will emerge as a core pillar of how not just India looks at maritime security in the Indo-Pacific, but also the imperatives and how the interests are emerging in the region, right? The second would be IUU fishing, which is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. I think that's also an area where India would likely play a very important role in terms of seeking new partnerships and offering a broader sense of cooperation in the region. And the third, of course, I think would be environmental sustainability and climate mitigation, because I think that is also a very important facet of how we look at maritime security. It's not just about traditional maritime security challenges, naval ships, war fighting in the seas, etc., but it's also about the non-traditional elements of maritime security and how that evolves in the region. So in that sense, I think it's very important. And these are the three areas which I would say would be very important going forward. And I think if you're looking at it from an Indian perspective, I think one area where India is already doing a lot of heavy lifting would be humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. So I think, broadly, these are the four issue areas which I think are likely going to dictate the way in which India pursues maritime security cooperation in the region.
Great. Thanks to all our speakers. At this point, I'd like to open this up to plenary and welcome any questions from the floor.
My name is Alves. I'm from Mozambique. I would like to pose a question to the panel, and I'd like to first give a brief context. We know that African nations such as Mozambique, Tanzania, Kenya, Madagascar, and other island states like Comoros, Mauritius, and Seychelles, they lie within broader Indo-Pacific geography. Yet they are often excluded from key dialogues led by major powers or regional blocs, despite the fact that they are very affected by the dynamics of the Indo-Pacific region, including rerouted global shipping due to the tensions at South China Sea, the insurgency of piracy, and also maritime crime. So my question is, how can Africa's Indian Ocean coastal countries be meaningfully integrated into Indo-Pacific maritime governance frameworks rather than being treated as peripheral stakeholders? Thank you.
Thanks, Elvis. We come to the gentleman here.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Inosawan Jose. I would like to ask the question to all panelists that want to respond to this. So first of all, right now, aside from UNCLOS, aside from the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, we have the BBNJ, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, and I think it's very important as an international law instrument that governs resource management beyond national jurisdiction. And I think in Indo-Pacific, this will be a very interesting instrument at play. So is there any panelist that wants to respond on how BBNJ might pose new dynamic to the Indo-Pacific maritime status quo? And then lastly, I would like to mention here a couple of things. First, Indonesia did miss the strategic opportunity to utilize IORA. Last year, the IORA Sekjen was still an Indonesian, His Excellency Salman. But now the Sekjen already moved to someone else, I think from India. So I think Indonesia missed the momentum because IORA, last year when I observed the social media and the websites, most of the programs are technical. There are rarely any synergized projects with ASEAN, for example, to implement the OIP. Although some of the areas of implementation might be actually quite similar and aligned to what AOIP is also envisioning. And then lastly, I think it's easy for us to find a practical solution. Right now, you have both the defense minister of Indonesia and the foreign minister of Indonesia. Both of them are the close minister to the president. The defense minister is the president former junior in the military, and then the foreign minister is the president's ideological son. So I think it's good that we can push 2+2 dialogue mechanism between Indonesia and India for Indo-Pacific. Because if Indonesia is not proposing the MOU draft, I think it's better if the Ministry of External Affairs from India might consider proposing the draft MOU, because the 2+2 dialogue between Indonesia and India are actually crucial. And I've never seen it happening. I was actually expecting it to be drafted and to be signed during the president's recent visit to Delhi, but yeah, I'm not sure why. But maybe there are some other priorities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There were 3 more hands here, so I'll request you to be very concise because of time. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ivan Lidare from ISIS, National University of Singapore. My question concerns IORA, which was brought by some other people too. Obviously, many of the things that you describe about blue security and so on fall under the preview of IORA, but regrettably, IORA has consistently underperformed. So to what an extent do you think IORA can be reformed to perform much better, and is this politically feasible? Thank you.
Thanks. Next.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Himrat Smith from Cambodian Center for Regional Study. I have 2 short questions. First one, attribute to Paco. You mentioned nearly 10 times we need to think beyond the US. What kind of thinking that a country in the region should think when we approach security question, relationship with the US? That's the first question. The second one addressed to Dr. Nishida regarding several months ago regarding a comment by Prime Minister Ishiba relating the concept of Asian NATO. Let's say, regardless of how it is named or how to name this kind of relationship or partnership, do you think this idea is so far-fetched, especially in terms of when conflict happen, for example, armed conflict in the region happen one day? Thank you.
Thank you. And the very last, yes.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Agus from United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. So our organization has been working with the Maritime Law Enforcement Agency in Southeast Asia and the Pacific in terms of, addressing maritime crimes in this region. And since 2022, we have been working with 10 member states of Southeast Asia to establish the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum. So we have the privilege in that process of the establishment to be the observer and also to support technically and also financially the establishment of the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum. So actually, the last meeting was the high-level meeting was conducted in Thailand just a few months ago, and then the technical expert meeting was conducted also in Indonesia, in Bogor, in July 2025. So actually, the idea of this establishment of the forum is to strengthen the cooperation among the Maritime Law Enforcement Agency, especially the Coast Guard, and many, support are needed by this forum, and I think the cooperation needs to be available to support this forum. So I think countries like India and also other countries in South Asia needs to support the establishment by sharing their experience.
Thank
and
you.
also when
I'm
this.
sorry, I might have to cut you short because we're really running out of time. So please summarize your question.
Yeah, no, I just want to invite other countries in this in South Asia and also in in other countries, like more developed countries, to support this establishment
Great.
of this forum to encourage cooperation in this region. Yeah, I think that's all.
Wonderful. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. So we'll respond. Please pick any of the questions, either that were addressed to you specifically, and make your closing statements as well. Wrap up in under a minute each. So this time I'll reverse the order, and we can start with you, Paco, and we'll go down. Yeah.
Just a quick answer to our colleague from Mozambique. I think it's a great question, and I'm glad that someone from East Africa is actually moderating this session. And I think it's great that ORF invited African partners. It's obviously true that we tend to, most Indo-Pacific vision tend to forget that East Africa is part of the Indo-Pacific. France has been trying to integrate by its overseas collectivities like La Réunion and Mayotte wider cooperation with East Africa, and it's obviously complicated, but that's an objective. To our Cambodian friend, our friend from Cambodia, look, I don't know how ASEAN countries should deal with the US, but let's do more with the European Union and ASEAN cooperation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Ipeta?
Right. Thank you very much. I touched on the question from a colleague from Mozambique. It's really important what you said. We know by heart a lot of those maritime security incidents happening in the east coast of Africa originates from the poverty, overpopulation, lack of jobs, and those issues. And we see over the years, like in the next 20 or 30 years, this will increase, right? As we see population growth, climate change, the urbanization, technological change, governance issues. So we should be really, paying attention to these issues to factor into our calculation. That's one of the reasons why still maintain our base in Djibouti to keep the counter-piracy operations. Now, this kind of the activities not just to be done by individual, the state action. We need to act as a UN like ODC to make institutional capability to the regional the countries and agencies. Now, coming back to Asian NATO, that was a big mistake that Ishiba did in the beginning. But what he really wanted to say, I understand, is that there's no set security framework in this region. We need to try to address this issue. What he actually mentioned in his the piece is that he wanted to deter China's aggression, but he also wanted to engage with China, making a confidence building, right? So he's not really talking about the alliance system to be fixated, but he was talking more about cooperative, security framework that might be needed in this region. Of course, it's going to be very difficult, and he made a very wrong the acronym of NATO to be used in the Asian context.
Thanks, Ipeta. Santan?
Thanks. I'll just quickly respond to the first question on Africa. I mean, two examples really demonstrate why Africa is a very important part of the Indo-Pacific. First is Djibouti. I think Djibouti in many ways is the melting pot of all security sort of actors being present in the region. And second, again, I would bring in IORA because the seat of IORA actually is in Mauritius. So I think, and increasingly with IORA making its Indo-Pacific outlook more clear and with very concrete policy outcomes coming out now of IORA, I think the area of Africa within the larger Indo-Pacific context will obviously remain very important. And second, on the question of whether IORA has underperformed or not, I think the challenge has been that the whole idea of an Indian Ocean regionalism has taken a long while to take off. So while, countries like Sri Lanka, Maldives, India, they are an integral part of the Indian Ocean, they largely view themselves as South Asian actors. Similar is the case in, let's say, Southeast Asia or Africa. So I think as the regional consciousness of Indian Ocean sort of bolsters, I think IORA will increasingly find itself in a more, working in a more efficient manner. I'll just close here.
Thanks, Santan. Very finally, Nilanthi.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the first question, I would consider IORA, as Sayantan said, and to actually pursue a leadership position in IORA. There's the vice chair opportunity, so it's essentially for 2 years getting that observing and actually performing in that function before moving to chair of IORA. Also seeking leadership in IONS, for example, heading one of the working groups. There's also the Colombo Security Conclave, which has been expanding to try to to include some of the smaller African countries like Seychelles, Mauritius. And for the US part, it does the Cutlass Express exercise, so making sure Mozambique, other countries in the Southwest Indian Ocean are participants. For the question about IORA, I would ask about, in terms of underperforming relative to what? In terms of the regionalism in Southeast Asia, some look at that with envy, whereas some are critical of region as diverse and huge as the Indian Ocean. It's very challenging to bring everybody together. So I think there's a relational aspect to that question that needs to be addressed. In terms of Cambodia, I think relations with the US, the Ream Naval Base has caused a lot of controversy and headlines. So I think allowing a port visit there by the US Navy would be a good way to diffuse that. There's a model in terms of Hambantota Port in Sri Lanka that can be looked to. And then finally, the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum. I think the Quad is a good minilateral for advancing that because the Quad has paid more attention lately to Coast Guard cooperation.
Wonderful. I think that's an excellent place to end this discussion. Thank you all for the very rich perspectives. If I could ask you to help me upload the panel. Thank you, everyone.